I used to live in a small town in Texas. My town was so small that it wasn't so much a town as it was a really big neighborhood with one gas station. My town wasn't completely finished. A lot of the streets had empty lots and woods. Even though the town was 60 years old, it was possible to walk onto a lot, head to the woods, and get lost if you didn't know exactly where you were going. And since we had deer and wild animals running around, it wasn't a good idea to go wandering, if you know what I mean. My house was in the oldest part of this town. I lived on a circle. Yes, a circle. My street was an actual circle that you could drive all the way around. And what was weird about it was that my street had houses on all the lots, with the houses on the inside of the circle, including mine, with a perimeter to about 2 acres of free woods. And it was so packed that you couldn't see through it. It was just something everyone knew about, but didn't talk about. Anyway, my school had a media class that you could take, the kind where they tell you to make short films and stuff. A bunch of my friends from the neighborhood and I were grouped together for one of these short film projects. Like idiots, we decided to do a short horror film based off the Blair Witch Project movie. It had been out by that time for a couple of years, so we thought it would be a cool idea since found footage films hadn't really become a thing yet. And we thought since our neighborhood, known for being creepy as fuck at the best of times, had a forest in it, we could just shoot our project there. So, my friends Genesis, Hunter, Tyler, Cass, and I decided to try to shoot our short film in one evening. And you guessed it, we decided to shoot it in the woods right behind my house. My parents were cool with it because they'd be able to hear me yell if something happened, and we didn't have curfews, so we're like, cool, we'll shoot it on Saturday. Saturday rolls around and the first 5 hours are fine. Nothing spooky happens, so we go back to my house, eat, then decide to shoot the last couple of scenes. That is when shit went south. We come out of my house, jump the backyard fence, and head back into the woods. The second we hit the tree line, we all feel like something is just off. Like it just doesn't feel right. The air is sticky and heavy. I mean, yeah, it's Texas, and that's a Texas spring for you, but this was different. It felt like walking through water or tar or mud. It was just hard to move forward. But the feeling goes away. We get through a couple more shots, and it's time to shoot the very last scene. It's simple. Genesis walking through the woods and into a clearing. That's it. Like I said, this area is about 2 total acres. We'd been all over the woods by this point, getting different shots. But at night, it felt like the woods we were in weren't the same woods from that afternoon. The boulders weren't in the right place, the trees weren't in the right place. There was a clearing where there shouldn't have been one. It was really weird. In my mind, I'm thinking, all right, you just got turned around. Happens all the time, right? It's a sizable area, and just because you've been walking around it for 5 hours doesn't mean you know it like the back of your hand. I can accept that. What I can't accept is the fact that there was now a shed in the middle of the clearing that we had decided to shoot our last scene in. What I mean is, when we scouted the place 3 days before shooting, when we went in there to check sound earlier that day, and even right before we went back to my house, there was no shed in that woods. None. Zip. Zilch. Zero. There were no buildings, no construction supplies, not even a football in that woods. And yet here was this shed in the middle of the clearing. We were all getting vibes from this thing, like we weren't supposed to find it, or we were unwelcome in its presence, or that we were somehow intruding on its alone time. So the guys tell us to hang tight, they're gonna go investigate. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember them coming back and telling us that we had to check it out. I went up to the shed and realized that it was very, very old. The wood was warped and the walls bowed inwards. The wood from the shed Didn't look like any of the trees from that part of Texas. It wasn't mesquite. My best guess would be maybe maple. I was walking around the edge of the shed, and we were trying to figure out where this thing came from, or if it had always been there, and if it had been, how we had managed to miss it. We were close enough to my house that I could hear my dad talking on the phone in the backyard. In fact, all we had to do was walk forward for a minute or two and we'd hit the backyard fence. That's when I realized this shed had no windows and no doors. I told my friends and we looked for trapdoors or latches, and Tyler even got on the roof of the shed to check for a way. Not that we wanted in, but at this point I was curious because it didn't feel like a shed should be there. And shouldn't there be an entryway? We didn't find any way into the shed, so we tried to figure out what we should do. The shed was in the middle of the shot, but none of us wanted to shoot it. Especially not Genesis. She was having none of it. We were in the middle of deciding to shoot some other time because we were all creeped out when we heard it. A laugh. A long, low, guttural laugh coming from the shed. And then we hear thud, thud, thud. We were close enough to the shed that we could see the wall shake, and we booked it out of there. It took us less than 2 minutes to get back to my backyard. At this point, you're probably thinking that we were high or that this is fictional, and I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't been there. But I told my dad when we got back, who back then didn't believe in the paranormal. It was still relatively early, about 10 p.m., so my dad goes into the house, gets his shotgun, goes to our neighbor, who's a cop, who also gets his shotgun, tells us to get inside, and they go into the woods with flashlights and everything. He was gone for 10 minutes. When he got back, he told me that I wasn't allowed to go back there anymore, and we'd have to find something else to do our final scene in. It was years before he told me what happened in the woods, but he finally did. He and our neighbor found the shed, couldn't find a door, and heard the laughing. Then they heard growling go from inside the shed to outside the shed. Then, and my dad still swears to this, they saw something huge and human-like come out of the wall of the shed, get down on all fours, turn black, and growl at them. These two grown-ass men, both with significant military experience, nearly crapped themselves trying to get back to the house. My dad petitioned the town to get the shed removed, and it was knocked down a week later. We never talked about it again. But here's where it gets weird one more time. My little sister still lives at home. She moved back in because she just got into med school and needed to save some money. She called me a few days ago to tell me that one of the dogs got loose this afternoon and headed for the woods. When she went in there to get it, she saw a dark wood shed. The dog saw it too and was barking and growling. Then she and the dog heard a growl, and the dog backed up like it was scared and ran home. My little sister didn't know about the shed, unless my dad told her, but he says he didn't. I never told her about it because she's younger than me, and a bunch of weird stuff had already happened. My sister told my dad, who went back out to see it. He said it was the same shed. He won't say anything else, but I know he's probably panicking. I don't know what to think about all this. I mean, it's just one of the many weird things that happened in that neighborhood when I was a kid, but it always stuck out as being rather ominous. Is it possible that we had collective hysteria? Sure, we were kids and we were making a short horror film. I mean, is it possible that we just missed the shed? Absolutely. The woods can get confusing even when it's broad daylight. Is it possible that a wild animal was closer to us than we thought and that's what we heard instead of a weird scream? Of course, it's Texas, and we were known to have big cats running around. But what I can't explain is how the shed my dad had torn down years ago showed back up again, and my sister was the one to find it. That's what I'm having trouble with. My dad had the fire department come take the shed down. They said it was a fire hazard, so they just got rid of it. My sister's safe, my family's safe, and I'm happy to hear that, but why a shed with no windows or doors? I posted this here, and elsewhere too, but I haven't found any help yet. I hope somebody can tell me what's going on, because I don't want to be the only one dealing with this. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping and gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. Driving back on a dirt road at around 30 miles per hour, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't!" I completely froze. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, and then completely stopped when I heard it tap, tap on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I didn't know what was going on and thought it was over until our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. Then I heard it again, tap, tap, but from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and sighed. It was quiet, besides the truck and the road. He looked at me and said, "We will ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." That's the Navajo to English equivalent anyway. I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the radio, watching the time, listening to my uncle sing an old prayer until we got to my grandmother's house. I recently called my uncle because I had a nightmare about that night, and we talked about it for a bit. He said, "I didn't see faces, just eyes, like brake lights you would see on the road. It watched you." Before hanging up, I had tried making a joke out of it. I said, "Well, why didn't you just step on the brake when it was in the back then?" He did not laugh, just paused, and then answered, "Because it wasn't alone." So, before I ever had these encounters, I really didn't believe much in the paranormal. I had a small fascination for it, but I never really truly believed in supernatural beings until these few odd occurrences. This is a bit of a long story, but I think it's worth telling. I currently date my fiance, and she's a Native American. We'll call her S. A few years ago, when we first started dating, we kept that a secret, as her mom disapproved of any of her children dating at a young age. That led us to go sneaking out at night to see each other. I'd always leave my house, say 9 or 10 p.m., only to sneak back home around 1 a.m. or so. Before I continue, I should give you a layout of our area. The distance between my house and her house is not that far really, but to get there is pretty damn scary. Our houses are separated by a large highway, and every night I either take a shortcut through a dirt path along the highway next to an old railroad, which is completely pitch black, by the way, or I take a long route through my high school, which is well lit and makes the uneasy feeling of being out late not so bad. Anyways, when we go out and talk at night, she would always jump to the topic of the paranormal, stating that she could hear the dead speak to her and had various encounters with a shadow man when she was young. I just humored her and joked around and told her that one day they would come for her. As time went on, we spoke almost every night, and she told me that her brother was being attacked by a skinwalker. I almost didn't believe her, but I had a gut feeling by the way she looked at me that she was being serious. This was the time where I had introduced myself to her mother as her friend, and I'd regularly stayed at her place once her mom trusted me more. One night I noticed S burning sage around the house, and I inquired about it. This is to ward off the evil spirits and keep skinwalkers away. Skinwalkers? I asked. She gave me a brief explanation of what exactly they were. She had told me that these creatures give up what made them human to become these things and act like hired guns that stalk their prey. They like to play games with their victims, and they only prey on people who are afraid of them. They like to initiate their game by whistling 2 extremely loud whistles that announce their presence. She claimed their whistling could be heard from miles away. I called bullshit and told her nothing is going to happen to them. After a few nights of them doing this, there was one night that I came over and noticed that she hadn't burned any sage, as she always did a routine burning at around 8 or 9 p.m. But I didn't mention any of that to her or her family, as the smell of sage always made my nose burn and it made it hard to breathe. So, as it was getting late and I had to get home, I said my goodbyes and took off. So I get to the end of her street, and when you get to the end of it, you end up at a T-bone intersection on a semi-main road. To the north of that road, it leads to the highway. To the south, to more neighborhoods. I live northeast from her place, so naturally, when I get to the intersection, I cross the street and head north. But as I got to the end of her neighborhood, I heard it. 2 very loud, distinct whistles cut through the night and sent chills down my spine. My hair all around my body standing on end, and I tried to make out the location of the sound. It was coming miles way down south of the road. One thought popped into my head. She forgot to burn the sage tonight. Part of me wanted to think that this was just an elaborate prank that she had planned, but a deep sinking feeling at the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't. I quickly ran back to her house, as it wasn't that far from the end of the street, and frantically knocked on her door. They had only been about 5 to 10 minutes from when I left, so they weren't asleep yet. I told them about what I had heard, and I told them to burn the sage. Just in case, I said, mostly to myself. Even though it may not be real, it's better to be safe than sorry, I figured. I make my exit as they finish burning the sage and head back to the intersection. It was very late, I'd say 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. on a school night, so I had to get home quickly. I speed walked across the main street, heading northeast diagonally, and right when I got to the other side, I noticed him. Just across the street was an old man. Normally, I would just play it off as another pedestrian, but this guy, he just stuck out so much. It wasn't really how he looked or how he dressed, it was just how he moved that struck me as odd. The old man that looked about in his 60s or 70s was moving at the pace of a 20-year-old man. I only took a glance at him for a few seconds, but in that time span, this man just stared at me. A deep, cold stare, his eyes wide with absolutely no expression on his face. Just a flat face. No furrowed brows, no nothing. I walked slowly, keeping him just at the corner of my sight as I watched him. He walked down towards S's neighborhood. He kept his damn eyes trained on mine, craning his neck as he walked by, even when I already had my back to him. You'd think I was scared, but I wasn't. I didn't feel any fear. I was just weirded out by his aura or something like that. The man didn't turn into my girlfriend's street. He just continued his fast march down to the south, and I felt a bit of relief and brushed it off as some crazy drug addict or something. Time passes, and during that time, just some weird shit happens at S's house. That's another story for another day. No skinwalker activity, though. S continued her nightly ritual as usual, and by that time her mom had brought a witch doctor to bless the home and perform a ritual to remove a ghost bone from S's brother. From what I gather, a ghost bone is some kind of hex or trap. The trap is a fetish that has been held dear to a manic spirit. It can be almost anything, like a toy doll or a cane, something dear to a lost spirit. And then it attaches its spirit bone to a target host. I guess that not only brought the attention of a ghost, but also a damn skinwalker. Once it was removed from him, things kind of calmed down. But this is where mentioning the high school comes into play. Now once I go north at the T-Bone intersection, I hit the highway. I have to cross the highway and head east to get to my place, and that would mean that I would take a quick route in the dark dirt road or cut through an abandoned railroad dock onto another street that heads to my school. And from there, I cut through my school to go to my house. I decided I didn't want to walk in the darkness, and I cut through the lot. As I got to the street that led to my school, I noticed this guy. He's heading toward me on a bike. He is very far away at the time, and I pay him no mind. As I get closer to him, I get further away from the only streetlight on the street. Keep in mind that the railroad dock is next to the school, so I still have to walk some distance to get to the school. I noticed a sense of eeriness about him. He gave me that similar feeling to the old man, how it just weirded me out, and I caught him staring at me. The same wide-eyed look and blank face as the old man. Also, the way he was pedaling was so unnatural. He was moving at incredible speeds, almost seemed like he was moving at around 20 miles an hour. He covered the distance between us alarmingly fast and passed me. Same damn thing as the old man, literally cranes his neck to keep staring at me, and manages to move his bike along the curve of the road in perfect manner, like it was almost natural to him. Thankfully, he kept on riding, and at this point I told myself not to be afraid at all. That if I had a tiny tinge of fear, he would most definitely come for me. I kept calm and walked to the school. Now you'd think the school was shut out by fences, but it was a very nice school that had no need to build large fences so you could walk past the small metal gates that are set up. It was mostly used to block cars and the like from getting past. No one really vandalized it either, so another reason for no large fences. Once I get halfway through the school, I hear what sounds like a bike and cackling behind me. A feeling of dread sinks in. "Oh shit," I whispered under my breath, and glanced back, but saw nothing. I hurried my pace, as all I had to do was go past one large building, and then clear a field and jump the only large chain link fence on the property. Just to give you a better perspective, the entrance I went through is a parking lot, and the path I took is somewhat of a path to allow small vehicles and maintenance trucks to drive through, where buildings with different classes strewn about from left to right is a small road that winded through the whole school diagonally. Two large buildings occupy the east and west side of the lot. My trip usually meant that I walked between the large buildings, and I'd see the field and from there my home neighborhood. I remained calm as I was nearing the end of the road and got between the two buildings. As you get to them, there's a large open area with tables and chairs to eat lunch at, and this area is not well lit, and it can be pretty damn creepy at night, as the trees and poles can block a clear view ahead. You had to get past that from this route, and regret soon followed as I continued ahead. Should have just stayed the night at S's, I huffed out under my breath, rasping, as I felt very nervous walking through the eating area. Then I hear tapping ahead, as if someone is tapping their knuckles or fingers on a pole. 2 taps. The fucker was toying with me. "What the fuck do you want?" I yelled out in anger and annoyance to the direction of the tapping. No response. Just silence. It was too damn quiet. And then, the most fucked up thing I have ever heard in my life is whispered into my ear. "I want your skin." In the most horrid, raspy, alien voice I had ever heard, like a mixture between a child, a male, and a female all at once. I freaked and noped the fuck out of there. I sprinted the fastest I've ever run in my life, and thankfully I had trained in parkour for a few months at the time, and had some decent acrobatic skill. Just enough to climb and balance on fences and leap great distances. I leaped onto a table, ran, jumped from the table to table, hearing tapping noises from behind getting closer and closer. The cackling was slowly getting louder and louder as I was getting to the passage between the buildings. Once I had gotten there, the noise stopped abruptly, but I didn't dare stop or turn back. I just kept going and got to the field and made a mad dash to the only tall fence in this accursed school. Just my luck, right? As I cleared the distance and near my destination, I climbed that damned fence faster than I had ever climbed anything in my life. Gotta love an adrenaline rush. Right as I got to the top of the fence, where I would usually lift my whole body over and toss myself over with one hand on top of the rail, something bit into my wrist, the wrist that was holding my weight. I yelped and I lost my balance, making the fall a pretty bad one. That moment totally screwed up how my body was turned. Normally, I bend at the knees to handle all the weight of my momentum, but when that happened, I lost concentration. It was a pretty long fall, I would say 8 to 9 feet. I unfortunately landed very badly and put most of my weight on one leg. I slammed to the ground hard on my sides. Pain surged into my right knee and down the right side of my body. If it weren't for the adrenaline, I might have just passed out from the pain. I laid there curled up on the ground, just feeling like it was over and that I was surely dead. And then I noticed the bite mark. It was odd because the bite felt very painful, but this wasn't that deep. 4 small slash marks on the underside of my wrist. I tore a piece of my shirt and wrapped on my wrist and limped back to my house. Thankfully, I gained the strength to walk to the streets ahead where the rest of the trip was blessedly uneventful. I was amazed the damn thing didn't just leap over and end my life, since it could move at such incredible speeds. The story I had to make up to my parents was so much bullshit that even when they thought I had told them the truth, they instead believed the lie. I can't really remember what I said happened, something along the lines of being depressed and cutting myself, and that made me fall and hurt my leg in the bathroom. Something like that. But what I could tell you from this experience is that I was left with a whole new perspective of otherworldly beings, and that some instance of their existence is true in some way. I know it was a weird thing to tell my parents, but somehow I thought that made me sound less crazy than the actual story. I was not only left with a mental scar, but a permanent injury to my leg. Torn ligaments had caused my knee to become what I now know is a degenerative knee, which means I have signs of an arthritic joint. Well, fuck, man. Lesson learned. Don't take long walks at night, and always stay in the light, because you just never know what might be lurking in the dark. A friend of mine in high school was driving on the Wind River Reservation with his older brother one night. They came upon an elderly lady. She wasn't hitchhiking, but they offered her a ride, and she accepted. About an hour later into the drive, they had totally forgotten that she was in the back seat. My friend turned around, but the seat was empty. Then he looked out his window as they were driving along at 65 miles per hour. The old lady was running next to the car, keeping up with them, along the shoulder and laughing at them. However, she was no longer fully human, but had the legs of a mule deer. They stepped on the gas and got the hell out of there. Yesterday, I was hiking at the Barton Creek Greenbelt, like I do most every week. I had decided to go off trail, which I had done many times before, except this time I went much deeper into the woods than I had gone before. I was following the river when I stumbled upon a cave. It was kind of small, and I would have had to crawl on my belly to go in. and since I was alone, I decided to pass on that for the time being. Not long after, I found two more caves next to each other. These were much larger, and I could see support beams not far inside. I approached the larger of the two and began to enter, when suddenly I saw a pair of red eyes blink from the darkness. This threw me off, as I wasn't expecting to find anything in there. I decided to leave whatever was in there alone, but on my way back I passed the cave again. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to enter once more. This time I saw no eyes, so I figured the thing from before had left. I ventured in further, where I heard shuffling deeper in the cave. I froze. The shuffling seemed to be going away from me. I started to back out when I heard a blood-curdling, inhuman scream from the darkness. I bolted, not knowing what it was or what it would do to me. Upon researching later, I found that the scream I heard was similar to that of the supposed skinwalker screams I found on YouTube. I know it wasn't a cougar. They have a very distinctive scream, and this didn't sound like that. And a cougar's eyes would reflect yellow, not red. Could this be real? A prank? Let me know your thoughts.